We're on the Tamiami Trail right now, and I grew up in Florida and been traveling this road for my entire life. And it's always cool when you find places in Florida that haven't changed much, because everything else is changing, and this is one of the places that really hasn't.
Florida has historically been an outpost that attracts these quirky, unusual, sometimes outlandish, sometimes unpleasant and dangerous characters.
It looked like a man covered with hair, about 6.5, a little tall, 6.5, 7 feet tall.
It's a place that's unscripted.
A kind of world that really is a bygone world.
I don't know, it just calls you, you know, a road that's not one that everybody uses a lot, you know.
This is one of the most primeval areas that I've been in the world.
You know, actually, it's really gorgeous right now. It's just so hot and humid.
Old Florida.
As far as I can see, sky is like a broader shore. Horizons always on the go. Don't blank, it'll pass you by. Fade away.
First I said, that's a strange looking place. I got to go there.
South Florida, the most exotic subtropical landscape in the continental United States, has long been a beacon to a certain kind of dreamer. Their stories run the gamut, from local businessmen with grand plans to develop their backyard swampland, to wealthy northerners who come down for a visit, fall head over heels for the sunny beaches and swaying palm trees, and then set to work trying to transform it all into a vision of paradise for snowbirds and retirees.
For those who have known only the old cities, today's new city of Cape Coral is an unforgettable experience.
It's unbelievable. I see it every day and I still don't believe it. The amount of people moving into the area is simply amazing.
A new city emerging from the wilderness.
When you consider most of South Florida, it's amazing it could ever have inspired all these dreams. It's a muddy mix of swamp and prairie, filled with snakes and alligators and swarms of mosquitoes so big and bloodthirsty they drove the first explorers nearly mad. Yet just one look at the two coasts, and it all becomes clear. It should be no surprise, then, that the idea of linking the coasts was one of the boldest dreams ever conjured up in South Florida. That dream persisted for generations until it was finally realized by this, the Tamiami Trail. The Tamiami Trail is the final 275 miles of Route 41, one of the original U.S. highways laid out in the 1920s. Its sing-songy name is a contraction of its endpoints, Tampa and Miami. When it was being built, the trail was hailed as an engineering feat that rivaled the digging of the Panama Canal. Its official opening in the spring of 1928 was national news. But the trail never lived up to the dream. New York businessman Baron Collier had big plans for the million acres of remote Gulf Coast swampland he amassed after his first fishing trip to the area in 1911. But even after spending a hefty chunk of his own money to finish the trail and link his little village to the booming city of Miami on the other side of the Everglades, Collier's backwater never became the thriving metropolis he envisioned. Today, the Tamiami Trail still passes through one of the loneliest places east of the Mississippi. Along the way, it lays bare the entire strange story of South Florida. A landscape that, for all the dredging and paving and building it's endured, has retained an uncanny power to cast a spell.
Dreamland, going down to Florida. I'll get some sand and mash it. Or maybe California. I'll get some sand.
Everybody called it Death Alley and, you know, everything else. It was supposed to be dangerous. And so I came out with my husband and other friends just for a ride out here. And I thought I was really doing something bad, you know.
My parents moved from Chicago to Miami in 1951. So I was 2 years old when we moved to Miami. But when I got old enough, my dad loved to fish, and some of my earliest memories of Florida and Miami are going out on the Tamiami Trail. And back then, in the 50s, the Everglades started right outside the city limit.
The road was very long from Miami all the way west to Naples. It took hours in unair-conditioned cars. The windows rolled down. It was sticky, it was awful. For kids, you know, you could see alligators on the road in the Tamiami Canal. It was wonderful, and sometimes an otter would go across the road. But when you stopped, the mosquitoes would attack you. You know, you were really in luck if a Seminole village was open and you got to go in and pay your money and see the people doing their things. And I did that, and everybody I know did that. That was just what you did.
I came to Florida in 1972, and there's certain things that stand out. One is driving the Tamiami Trail on my way to Key West, and that sense of vastness, that horizon of sawgrass, and the cypress domes in the far distance that look cool as in temperature, even though you don't know that they're cool or refreshing. They have that oasis look, and geez, what a feeling. And see the birds and the alligators. Again, the sense of that place being an island, of being a refuge.
When I first came to Florida, I just hated this trail. You know, I hate driving on it. Now, to me, it's just fascinating every time I drive because I'm looking at the light, the grass, the flowers. Now I've become part of it, so I understand it better.
The Tamiami Trail was conceived as the centerpiece of a grand plan designed to transform the entire southern end of the Florida peninsula into one vast empire of the Everglades. It was a plan that at first proved slow to take shape.
First U.S. government report on the Everglades was written by a guy named Buckingham Smith in 1848. He wrote this beautiful description of the Everglades. You know, he had a lyricism that you don't find in a lot of Treasury Department documents, talking about this vast lake of unruffled water with water lilies, and it really called it an awe-inspiring landscape. But he did say that his first and most abiding impression was the utter worthlessness of the entire region.
Apparently, enough people shared this opinion that South Florida still remained almost empty of white settlers more than a decade after the Transcontinental Railroad had already linked the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
People forget that, in 1880, there were already 1 million people living in Manhattan. But the Dade County census, which at that time was most of South Florida, was 257. It was really America's last frontier.
As people did drift into the area, they were immediately confronted with an unavoidable obstacle to just getting around.
That whole area that is now what we think of as the developed Florida, the retirees Florida, was all underwater, or most of it underwater, as late as the late 19th century.
South Florida only really started to open up after railroad baron Henry Flagler brought his Florida East Coast Railroad down the peninsula to Miami in the 1890s.
Before that, there were some families that came by boat, but the railroad, of course, made it so that everybody that wanted to come down to South Florida and see what this very pioneer area was like, they could get right on the train from New York and come all the way south.
By the 1920s, South Florida's image had undergone a complete transformation. Goodbye infernal swampland, "Hello, tropical paradise." This image, broadcast far and wide, was a powerful draw for a growing middle class with more leisure time on its hands and money to spend.
In the first half of the 1920s, South Florida enjoyed one of history's wildest land booms. There was immigration to rival the California gold rush and speculation that outstripped the Dutch tulip craze. It was a nutty time. There were thousands of people coming to Florida.
But defying the march of progress followed by the rest of the country, this exotic landscape inspired a different kind of dream.
In most of the country, it was going west. That was the way the history of America sort of went. It went west, and that was the dreams of owning a farm. Land ownership, it was hard work and your own enterprise, and you could get ahead. But when people started turning south, and mostly to Florida, the dream was sitting on the patio with a drink and not being cold. And it seems that that was the main factor that drove all these people to Florida.
The beaches, the lakes, the rivers, and the sun. From bustles to bikinis, Stutz Bearcats to modern sports cars, Florida has been the perennial playground of fun-loving vacationers through the years.
For the real estate developers looking to capitalize on this dream, the Tamiami Trail was absolutely essential.
I mean, the Tamiami Trail was built at a time when people were desperate to develop South Florida. This was going to be the great road that was going to knit the entire region together. There was going to be development all around it, all through the Everglades, and it was going to turn this uninhabitable backcountry into a thriving metropolis.
Despite the grand vision, initially there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm for the project. But the trail had a powerful backer, Miami businessman Captain James F. Jowdan.
Captain James F. Jowdan was, I think, the father of the Tamiami Trail because he persisted in trying to bring this dream that he had to reality, that is connecting Southwest Florida with Southeast Florida by way of a road through the Everglades, which many people thought was impossible technologically to create at that time, the early 1900s. He just stayed with it despite all the obstacles and all the slowdowns in construction that the road experienced.
Jowdan had more than a passing personal interest in the project. His Chevalier Corporation owned more than 200,000 acres in the Everglades, and he wanted a road built out there so he could start selling lots. Yet even just trying to find a path for the new road was a monumental task. Jowdan sent a 3-man survey crew out from Miami in search of one, and they promptly got lost. They weren't heard from again until they re-emerged in Key West more than a month later. As soon as construction did get underway, road-building crews were confronted with the same problems that had bedeviled anyone who'd ever tried to tame the Everglades.
Well, most of the Everglades area was underwater, and also it was hard lime rock bed. What they had to do was to build the road up, and the only way to do that was to take what would have been soil in some parts of the country and build it up. But it was hard rock, and so they had to blast, and they had to dredge, and it was and scrape, and it was very difficult. And what they were working with was very primitive. And so it was really like the Panama Canal, and also it was hot as hell, and it was in the swamps, and it was muggy, and I think there were diseases and mosquitoes, so it was not a place that would be a very friendly work environment.
It was a very laborious, slow-moving project.
As the real estate boom gathered steam, road boosters, calling themselves trailblazers, staged a publicity stunt to try to breathe life into the flagging enthusiasm for the project. 12 days into the trip from the Gulf Coast, a number of the trailblazers gave up, leaving their cars mired in the muck and hiking into Miami for a hot meal and a soft bed. Difficulties, both physical and financial, dogged the project as it dragged on to more than a decade. Only after Baron Collier put up his own money to lay down the last stretch of road did the highway finally link the two coasts. In all, it took more than a dozen years of work and about $100 million in today's dollars, but the Tamiami Trail eventually opened for public traffic on a warm spring day in 1928. The timing would seal its fate. The boom times were just about to go bust.
The first real nail in the coffin came when a hurricane leveled Miami. That really slowed things down. And then in 1928, there was another hurricane that blasted Lake Okeechobee right through its dike and drowned 2,500 people who had moved into the Everglades floodplain. And that not only killed the boom real dead, it essentially started the Great Depression in South Florida a few years early. And that was just the time that the Tamiami Trail was completed, but it was completed just in time for the bust.
That's all right, Lord, now that's all right. That's all right, you know, now that's all. Since I know I got a seat in the kingdom now, that's all. Well, you talk about me, just how much do you please? Oh, you try to talk me when I'm gonna bend mine. You know now, since I know I got a seat in it, hallelujah, that's all. Well, that's all right. Well, that's all right. Since I know I got a seat in the kingdom, hallelujah, that's all. Well, one day I was walking in Galilee. Well, I found my Jesus sitting on my knee.
I'm from this generation that Florida, even South Florida, Miami, was still kind of a wild Huck Finn type of place.
Jeff Klinkenberg is the real Florida columnist for the St. Petersburg Times. He travels the state looking for stories, returning again and again to the Tamiami Trail for some of his best articles.
I tell my wife, who's from New York, that I'm a barefoot boy from Miami, and she just laughs. She can't imagine that, having visited Miami a number of times, but that's how it was like. And the trail was like that. You'd get on 41 off of Biscayne Boulevard, and you drive just a few miles west, and suddenly there weren't any buildings, and you were in the Everglades, and there'd be these Seminole Indian villages, and you might stop there, and I mean, it was like no place else. I tell people sometimes that when I started writing about Florida, I was like a blind dog in a smokehouse. You know, everywhere I snapped, there was something meaty and fun to write about, and you didn't have to. You could be blind and still find these stories, and in a way, that's still true.
One of Klinkenberg's regular breakfast stops on the trail is the Giants Camp restaurant in the town of Gibsonton. For decades, Gibtown, as locals call it, was the place for carnival and circus sideshow performers to spend their off-season.
We're on the Tamiami Trail right now. In fact, I'm thinking about 8 or 9 miles south of Tampa. We're pretty close to where the trail begins. The story is that Al and Jeannie met in the Midwest in 1936 at a show. They eloped to Niagara Falls, and a little while later moved down here, where carnival people felt comfortable, and there were some opportunities, business opportunities.
When I was married to Al, we were known as the world's strangest married couple. He was 8 feet 4.5 inches tall, and I was the world's only living half girl. I'd go from Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, all around there, those little fairs. That's how I got started in it, when I was 3. So many people say, oh, how horrible, how terrible. You know, I was 3 years old, and people came in, and being no legs, about yay high, and they thought that was great, and they'd bring me dolls and candy and gifts. I enjoyed it. Even when we were on the road, we used to look the people over and say, well, this one looks like a doctor, this one, he must be a butcher, things like that, because you had to keep yourself entertained. You couldn't just sit there all day long and stare into outer space. We had a lot of methods like that that would take our minds off of whoever was staring. You know, the crowd looks at the freaks, and the freaks look at the crowd, and that's about how it is.
Tourists would come here to gawk. They'd come in here to buy food, but they'd also come in here to stare. And Al, he used to say, I'm peak proof. He didn't mind. But they would often want to buy his ring. And he would make, he'd make a fuss. He didn't want to part with his ring. But in the end, he would be persuaded and sell the ring, and then the tourists would leave. And then he would open a box where he had many of those rings. So he was a carny through and through, I guess you would say.
Author Randy Wayne White draws inspiration for his novels from the history and legends of the remote country surrounding his home just off the Tamiami Trail.
My old Florida cracker house sits atop an Indian mound. Mound, perhaps a pyramid at one time, built by the indigenous people of Southwest Florida, people known generically as the Calusas, and exactly where we're sitting right now, this precise location. People have been living here, telling stories, living, dying, copulating the bushes, peeing on the trees, essentially what I try to do right now, for more than 2,000 years. And I love that where I write, this precise little spot in the world, people have been telling stories, and that's what I do.
As research for his writing, White has explored the hidden places of the trail. On one of his trips, he met Irvin T. Rouse, writer of the classic Florida bluegrass song, The Orange Blossom Special. Rouse became a main character in White's novel, The Man Who Invented Florida.
One of my greatest memories of the Tamiami Trail, and that's the stretch of highway that connects Naples and Miami that crosses the Everglades. There's a place called Monroe Station, which is an old, it used to be housing for people who built the trail and then for the police officers who patrolled it. But right at Monroe Station, there's a little tiny dirt road, almost one lane, that turns south. And it looks like nothing. But if you follow that road, it goes in and then loops back out. The loop road is called. It goes way deep into the Everglades. And years ago, for whatever reason, I turned south on that dirt road. Had no idea it was there. And drove and drove and drove and drove and saw a bobcat and some other things, which was great. And the lovely cypress heads and the wild orchids and the snail kites and vultures. And the road began to loop, and suddenly there was a bar and a restaurant there called the Gatorhook Bar and Grill. Big sign. And beneath the sign, Gatorhook Bar and Grill, there was another sign that said, "No guns or knives allowed." And this was around sunset. I'm thinking, I've got to go in here. At the time, I chewed Red Man chewing tobacco, which was very fortuitous because it just gave me an in that I may not have had I had a New York accent or something akin to that. And went in and started talking to people, and they're distant. I mean, this was a isolated and unique community, but like many isolated, unique communities, they were also eager to be friendly. And these folks were friendly, and we had a great time. We're drinking beer and chewing tobacco and spitting in paper cups or somewhere. And there was an old man there. And he wore one of those Bing Crosby caps, and he had glasses on. And somebody said, "You know, that's Irvin Rouse." I said, "Irvin Rouse." "Well, yeah, he wrote the Orange Blossom Special." Even I know the Orange Blossom Special. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure he did, yeah. And Irvin will play it for you. And Irvin was an extraordinary guy. And he played the Orange Blossom Special, and he played it over and over. He's drinking whiskey, and played it and played it until tears were coming down his face. A great guy, and we became friends. And whenever I crossed the trail, I would drive in to see Irvin, and he lived in the shack, and he had pictures of country music singers all over the walls, stapled there. And he told the story that when he wrote the Orange Blossom Special, he went to New York to pitch it, and they sold it to RCA Records for $500. I mean, one of the classic songs of all time.
Coming down the railroad track. Look yonder coming down the railroad track. That's the Orange Blossom Special. I'm gonna bring my baby back.
In his book, Up for Grabs, John Rothschild chronicled the heyday of Florida swampland sales, another attempt to fulfill the grand vision of an Everglades empire the Tamiami Trail was supposed to make possible.
Well, this was a frontier, actually, in many, many ways, including ethically. In most parts of the country, when people homesteaded, they were pioneers, and they went there, and there hardly was anybody there. But here, sales agents preceded the population. And the whole idea was to convince people to come from the north and to buy as cheap as land as possible in Florida and sell it to them at very high prices. The cheap land in Florida was underwater. So the desperation was drying it up enough so that the people who'd moved down here would be satisfied that they were actually buying land. On the west coast of Florida in the 1950s, there were a couple of very flamboyant real estate property developers. And my favorite of that bunch is a guy named Leonard Rosen. Rosen's company, Gulf American, kind of pioneered the high-pressure sales tactics down here. He built a country club first, and that's basically where people would come on their free trips, and then he would send their salesmen in to kind of strong-arm them to buy land. Very similar to what happened to timeshare in the recent era. But he was the one who really got this thing going. And he got many, many people who were about to retire in America to send him money on an installment plan. He made up a lot of stories about what this place was going to be like. And he once said something that always stuck in my mind, which is all our lies turned out to be true. And so what happened is that after he got some people down there, the allure of Florida brought enough people down that in fact it did come true. I mean, Cape Coral became a nice place to live.
Cape Coral has been planned as a hometown, free from the mistakes of yesterday. A city planned for healthy, orderly growth, not just in its first years, but for the decades and generations to come.
It's a wonderful community to live in. We've enjoyed it ever since we moved down here because it's a wonderful climate, wonderful water, and a great place for boating, which is one of my hobbies. And after taking a look at Cape Coral, we decided this is the place we really want to live. This is the place where the pressure is off, where we can really enjoy life the way we had planned it on our retirement.
Well, you sure can't beat the weather any time of the year, especially the winter. Just got a great golf course, got all kinds of activities. You can't hardly beat Cape Coral anywhere.
We love it. I think for what you get here is so far above the same, at the same price level that you would get up north. I think it's great.
I took one look and I said, that's it.
It's the new city, a friendly city. It's what living is really all about.
In the years following the opening of the Tamiami Trail, newspaper reporters would occasionally send copy back to their editors up north, regaling readers with the tales of this wild road through the heart of the Everglades. Newsreels captured the experience on film.
The Seminoles called it Teheoki, the Florida Everglades, a half-land, half-water world which separated Florida's lower east and west coast until the 1920s. Large dredges inched across the marshes, scooping up the roadbed for the Tamiami Trail. Even today, the journey across the glades is like a trip back to primeval times. Many Seminole Indians still live in the glades or along the trail in a primitive manner.
You'll find plenty of places for recreation along the Tamiami Trail, a highway that crosses the state through the heart of the Everglades. Tamiami, Tampa to Miami. Most of the places are run by Indians, members of the Miccosukee tribe. Enthusiastic boatmen take good advantage of the waterways and lakes within the district.
Eventually, a fledgling tourist economy grew up along the trail.
As time went on and the increase of travelers from Southwest Florida to Southeast Florida picked up, entrepreneurs said, but not big entrepreneurs, mom and pop kind of business, we ought to open up a roadside station where you can get gasoline. People need gas, and people need food, and people need auto repairs. And the Indians, the Miccosukees and the Seminoles, then known just as the Seminoles, began to think, hey, you know, people consider us a novelty, which we've considered to be a negative. Let's make this thing a positive. And they began to open up so-called Indian villages in the area so that these roadside travelers could visit these villages. They could buy knickknacks, they could buy shirts the women made, they could watch alligator wrestling. And so the whole thing just kind of grows in that respect.
The roots of this economy reached back to Miami's earliest days as an exotic outpost in the American tropics, when it was a destination for wealthy Northerners escaping the cold winters back home to enjoy the accommodations at Henry Flagler's Royal Palm Hotel on Biscayne Bay. The first popular tourist attractions were created to give these vacationers something to do when they got bored with the view of the bay from the Royal Palms veranda.
Musa Isle Indian Village was located on the site of the old Musa Isle fruit farm and became the primary tourist attraction. Dignitaries from all over the world came there, taken out by the Chamber of Commerce of Miami. They were very proud of Musa Isle tourist attraction.
Early Miami boosters had no problem fudging history to serve the purpose of their message. The Seminole Indians were called the people of the Everglades, conveniently leaving out the fact that the Seminoles lived on their remote island hammocks because they'd been driven there from their ancestral homes farther north in a series of battles known as the Seminole Wars, the last of which had ended less than a half-century before.
Well, the Seminole Indians, they're known as the people of the Everglades, but it's funny, Florida's a place where even the Native Americans aren't native. They didn't choose to be in the Everglades. They were chased there by the ethnic cleansers of the United States Army.
But the Seminoles were nothing if not resourceful. They learned the basics in the Miami tourist sites, and then, when the Tamiami Trail was built, cutting off major canoe trails and diminishing the flow of water from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay, they saw a way to take advantage of the modern world's intrusion.
Because the Seminoles had been in the tourist attractions in Miami, they learned the ropes, they learned the economics, they saw the benefits. And from Big Cypress and from south of the Tamiami Trail, these people literally came to the road to set up their tourist attraction villages to live in a permanent situation so that they could reap the benefits of the economy. These were created for the tourists, all right, but they were the actual living quarters of the people. They were still isolated as much as they wanted to be, but we can see that they really didn't want the isolation, they wanted the economics, and that's why they moved out to the trail.
Within a decade after it opened, the Tamiami Trail was a prime destination for tourists looking for an authentic Everglades and Indian experience.
Along the Tamiami Trail, William McKinley went out and set up a village, and on the Naples end, Corey Osceola did. Chestnut Billy's a good case in point. He was a young man at Musa Isle, just a little boy, and he grew up in that atmosphere, and as soon as he could, he went out to the trail and established his own village where his mom and dad lived. But the main thing was that alligator wrestling had been developed. And that's really what made the tourist attractions. It was the thrill of alligator wrestling. You know, yes, they could see these tribal people in their native habitat, but it was mainly alligator wrestling because you never knew when somebody's going to get bitten.
In a wrestling pit with a Seminole Indian, it's every gator for himself.
Get a half Nelson on the beast and flop him over onto his back. Now massage his stomach and he'll go to sleep. Simple, isn't it?
Eventually, the Seminoles, now known as the Miccosukee, would modernize their operations, although some sites still retain their connection to those earlier times.
It probably would take some psychiatry for me to explain exactly why I went out on the trail to Everglades City. I was living with my girlfriend, then and now wife, in Miami, and we wanted to find some unusual place to live. And we looked on a map and saw this Everglades City, which is on the edge of the Tamiami Trail, knowing nothing about it. And we drove out there, and I'd grown up in Florida, so it reminded me in a way of some old Florida coastal fishing communities that in other parts of the state no longer existed. So we drove out there in our old hippie van and came into town and saw a lot for sale for $10,000, and we just bought the lot, and the next thing you know, we were renting a house there and building a house in the middle of this strange town. Baron Collier basically created Everglades City. There were a few old pioneer, very tough old pioneer families that could brave the mosquitoes there, which were incredibly difficult even today. But Collier came in and he built this hotel called the Rod and Gun Club. He imported a chef from Bavaria. He was pretty sure that Palm Beach was going to be at his doorstep very soon. But he actually wanted to do something that was grand and something that would sort of put him in history forever as one of the great developers. The Florida myth got at him at a very deep level.
Baron Collier's dream never materialized, but the residents of Everglades City seemed to be just fine with that.
When the Everglades City population talked about the snowbirds, the northerners who came down, the snowbirds, they said it with a little sneer. So they weren't so happy about the tourism, even though tourism would have brought money there, because they wanted to be alone to ply their illegal trade, whatever it was. And culturally, they were just so far away from the hedonistic tourism that Florida represented, they didn't like it. I mean, they didn't have much respect for it. But the Everglades City residents had been sort of 3 generations of people who could live in the swamps and I think live a life of lassitude pretty much until the next scam opportunity came along, or not scam, but the next illegal opportunity. And first it was the plume hunting for the fancy hats in Paris and New York. And after the plume hunting died down, the Everglades City kind of people went back to their hammocks until then came the rum running, and that was very big there. And then the alligator poaching was always a staple when the other things didn't work. And then finally, the drug smuggling. Tamiami Trail played its part in the drug running. First of all, the islands around there were very difficult to navigate, so these local fishermen could go out to the motherships and bring stuff in and elude the feds. But then they had to get it all to Miami, and there was a lot of truck traffic back and forth from Everglades City to Miami, thanks to Collier's Tamiami Trail. My wife and I were building a house in Everglades City, and as we looked around us, we saw people that were living in small fishing shacks and seemed to be impoverished in a way. I mean, they weren't starving, but they certainly weren't wealthy. And all of a sudden, about 3 or 4 years into us being there, we started seeing a fancy car, a Cadillac. They liked Cadillacs, and then another Cadillac, and all of a sudden satellite dishes and porches, additions on their trailers, and actually one guy bricked up his trailer and made it look like kind of a mansion. And then people leaving town. This was a very insular group of people, but all of a sudden they were taking vacations, and you started seeing these hints of this wealth and where was it coming from. And through the gossip mill, we found out where it was coming from. Everglades City had several drug busts, and the major one was when the feds came in and surrounded the whole town, pulled most of the boats out of the water, and marched all these guys off to jail. I was there to witness that. Unfortunately, I had just written an article in Rolling Stone magazine about Everglades City that focused on the drug culture, thinking that A, they would never see it, and B, there had already been articles in the Miami Herald and I wasn't naming names, so they wouldn't care. Well, they somehow connected the national publicity in my article to this big bust. So we didn't stay in Everglades City too much longer after that.
Well, I'm a stranger here, just floating in your town. Lord, I'm a stranger here, Lord, I just float in your town. Because I'm a poor little...
The isolation of the trail through the Everglades has helped spawn numerous legends of wild creatures that stalk the swamp. None has been more persistent than the story of the skunk ape.
The reason that I built the skunk ape research headquarters here on the trail is there's so many sightings in this area. The trail runs right through the Big Cypress Preserve. I'm right on the northern border of the national park, so it's a good congregating place for witnesses, people who've seen things. Just a week ago, I got a report from a lady down the road here, about 20 miles, said she was coming home from work and she drove right past a skunk ape. It was standing right in US 41 and she drove right past it. It didn't even move. The first time I saw the skunk ape, I was 10 years old and I was out hunting with my brother. And we had a rule in the house that if we could kill a deer before the school bus came, we got to stay home and package the meat. So we were always eager to get out early in the morning, see if we couldn't bag a deer. And that particular morning it was raining, just drizzling a little bit, and we'd walked out back and my brother saw something in the distance. But I couldn't see it because I couldn't see over the grass, and he had to pick me up, and when he picked me up and I looked out, there it was, 100 yards out, definitely a skunk ape. We'd heard about him growing up and we were like 10 years old, but there it was right in front of us. It was amazing, and we took off running. At that time we were afraid. Well, I've seen the skunk ape 3 times. I guess I've just really been blessed in this life. And things like that don't happen by coincidence. When you have an experience like I've had 3 times, it's life-changing. One evening I'm sitting there in my ladder stand, this area, I had been watching it for months, and I heard something splashing in the water, and it was coming my way. There's a lot of water, surface water out here, and I could hear it splash, splash, splash. And I had kind of dozed off, and I looked up, and there it was. It was coming right at me, maybe 100 yards, 75 yards away. It came by me. I took 27 photographs of it over a period of about 7 minutes. It was quite an experience. It looked like a man covered with hair, about 6.5, a little tall, 6.5, 7 feet tall. The closest it came to me was about 50 yards. And as it came past that point, I caught a horrible whiff of skunky odor, like a goat or something, a really strong smell associated with this thing. A lot of people say that it spends time down in the alligator caves and that the sulfur gets on it. It's kind of a sulfury smell. Is the Bigfoot and the skunk ape related? Well, I really don't have the information enough to say something like that. I know that this is an animal, that it resembles what people call a Bigfoot, but it's much smaller, it's different. This is a great place for people to share information. They can purchase t-shirts and help me fund my research. I sell a few items for my research funding. I've got some wildlife here, some native wildlife people can look at. I've got a little animal exhibit, some drinks and some sandwiches. Well, it all sounds good, going out and catching a skunk ape. But the reality is there's only at best, 7 to 9 of these animals left, according to the calculations that I've kind of devised. The ideal outcome for me having the headquarters here and being successful in that is mainly to give a place for people to come and talk about the Everglades, which is a good thing. And I would like to see, possibly in the future, some warning signs as people enter the Everglades on US 41, or caution signs, skunk ape crossing, next 7 miles, something like that, in areas where they're sighted on a regular basis. That's my ultimate goal.
It's not as though everyone simply forgot the grand future originally envisioned for the Tamiami Trail and the Everglades. Big plans came and went. Some panned out, others never got off the ground. But nothing is more responsible for the isolation out on the trail today than this, the Everglades National Park. When it was dedicated in 1947, it began a process of preservation that would result in more than 2 million acres of protected lands in the area where Captain Jourdan and Baron Collier planned their empires. But for some people, the isolation is the attraction.
My name is Clyde Butcher. We're in Big Cypress Gallery, midway between Miami and Naples on Tamiami Trail. I first basically started exploring Big Cypress in 1983 to 84. I met Oscar Thompson. Oscar was a sixth generation, and he had a photography shop in Fort Myers. And he showed me these little weird pictures of Big Cypress, and I said, that's a strange looking place. I got to go there. So he says to his wife, well, take care of the store, we're going. And we drop in his four-wheel drive, and he takes me out, and that's how I kind of got going. My first impression was it was like, and it still is, you feel like you're in Jurassic Park. I feel like you're 10 million years ago. This is one of the most primeval areas that I've been in the world. And I've been around a few places around the world, and there's no system like it that I know of in the world. It's a magic place where the river is 100 miles wide. You go down the Amazon, you can't see through the bottom of the Amazon. It's mud, you know. And the Amazon is basically rivers running through jungles. This is basically jungle in the river. About 1991, we started looking for a place for a gallery. And we wanted a place for a gallery was a place that represented what we do in the photography. And to find a place like that is, it's not that easy. I mean, civilization is basically taken over. When you come into Big Cypress, you don't see a lot of wildlife immediately, but when you stop and slow down, you start seeing and feeling the rhythm of the Big Cypress, and everything's crawling and growing. It's a lot of crawlies here. Most people, when they see nature, they're used to seeing it in their car. When you go out in California, you go to Utah, Wyoming, you see all these great mountains. You can basically do your tour from your car. In the Big Cypress, to really see it, you actually have to get out of your car and walk into it. It's an intimate place. It's not, I call it a biological place, not a geological. The intimacy is when you walk through it. And the problem with that is there's no trails, everything is a trail. You just have to get out and walk. People don't realize Big Cypress is mostly rock. There may be some mud, but it may be only 6 inches, maybe sometimes 8 or 9 inches. It's actually very visitor-oriented if you're not scared of the gators and the snakes. The gallery basically helps explain the Everglades to people when they come in. They can see, oh, this is what the Everglades is. Because a lot of people don't want to get out and get wet. They don't want to go back and see what's in the back country. I'm not sure if I'm a teacher or a photographer. My goal is to teach people about the world and the Everglades. And this subject matter is so diverse. I've been to a lot of places around. In Florida, for me, it has more exciting, interesting landscape than any place in the world. Every time you go around a corner, it's different. The problem with Florida, though, it's chaos, visual chaos. And what excites me is to be able to bring order to that chaos so people can then see and feel the Everglades. My pictures are very chaotic. They're composed chaos. And I think that's what I like about the Everglades, is the chaos. Because when you have chaos in nature, it's normally biologically correct. If it's not chaos, it's usually been manipulated by man. And when you go back here, you can tell man has not much to do with this.
When you leave the Everglades on the trail and enter the western edge of Miami, it is hard to imagine that what you've left behind could in any way be connected to what you see around you. The landscape is urban sprawl. The language is Spanish. The history and cultural roots of the people, Latin American and Caribbean. Here, where the trail is called Calle Ocho, it is the main artery through Miami's Little Havana neighborhood. And what this highway once was is far less important than what it is today. Here, South Florida's early transformation from wilderness to tropical playground has been eclipsed by its later transformation into the northernmost capital of Latin America. The snowbird's dream of fun in the sun has given way to the immigrant dream of a new life. Still, if there is anything that connects the current South Floridians to the older history of this place, it is the Tamiami Trail. These newer stories of escape and refuge are simply the most recent of the ones you'll find all along this road. The Tamiami Trail may not have lived up to the dream of knitting the entire region together through development, but because it never did, it can now connect people through its stories.
Son, it's Florida. We'll now talk about your rambling.
The Tamiami Trail is remarkably unchanged.
And boy, the range of societies in that space, linked by that those narrow lanes of asphalt, they cover the spectrum.
The Tamiami Trail is one of the great roads in America.
It's of a completely different time.
It's not an obvious place.
And you don't know what you're going to find, you know.
Well, I mean, you can get lost here.
I'll get some sand in my shoe. Or maybe California. I'll get some sand in my shoe. I ride the orange blossom special. And I'll lose in New York.